national conference. So recording is an important thing. So the proposed title was BICS, CALP, and Bilingual Education, a Love Triangle Gone Wrong. Seems like a lifetime special. Or not.
I thought it sounded like a novella title.
Yeah, same kind of thing. Social and instructional language and academic language is where my focus is going to be this evening. And your invitation is like, why are you here? It's Thursday evening. I'm sure you have other plans. Or is there a specific question you're hoping to get answered or at least discussed? So if you want to drop it in the chat or anybody wants to talk.
Hi.
It's my teacher wait face. Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can.
My name is Raul Alarcon, and I am a principal of City Language Immersion Charter, a dual language elementary school in the heart of Los Angeles, California. Longtime bilingual educator, over 30 years now. And I founded this school 10 years ago. And one of the things that I'm really interested in talking about today is a social language. And the reason why I bring that up is because in California, and I wish I knew where everybody was from and their roles, but in California, we moved towards a new way of looking at ELD standards, looking at designated, well, what we're calling designated and integrated standards. Mm-hmm. And in California, we have moved so far in the pendulum, focusing on academic language, that we are forgetting the importance of also focusing time and attention to social language. So we have kids at our school, and in many schools, when I speak to a lot of my administrator friends, that are doing okay in terms of reading and writing in Spanish, for example, but try getting kids to participate in a social conversation is like pulling teeth. So our kids are reading and writing, but we're losing that really important aspect of language learning, and that is the social aspect. And when you talk to parents, one of the things that they're most interested in their children is their ability to learn how to communicate with others in the target language. So that's why I'm here today.
All right. I'm not sure I will answer all that, but I do have a few resources and maybe a little food for thought. Since you mentioned that you'd like to know where everyone is from, people are starting to drop that in the chat.
Oh, nice.
So, and I'm in Central Florida. I'm in Auburndale, which is closest to Lakeland, but you're in California, maybe that's not familiar. I'm between Tampa and Orlando. So smack dab in the middle of Florida.
All right, very cool.
All right. So in a group full of language teachers, when I got my job at Wida, which is in Wisconsin, they're like, oh, it's cold up here in the winter. Like, you're from Florida. I'm like, I'm from Minnesota. So if you're wondering where my accent is from, it's Minnesotan. There you go. So anyone else kind of want to share? Yvonne put her purpose in the chat. Some of the differences in teaching social language in a dual language classroom. And I'm really excited about that because I do have a Spanish resource for you today. I know not everyone's dual language is Spanish, but I do have a resource. All right. Anybody else want to hop on the mic, or am I moving forward?
Well, I just want to say, I think that's such an interesting comment, because as a former dual language teacher, I felt like it was always taken for granted that the social language would follow. And we had children who were non-native speakers who were learning English. And there was just such an ostracism that went on between the kids who were, for example, and I was in Houston, Texas, who were native Spanish speaking and didn't speak English well. Those kids were often ostracized, if not directly, just de facto, even from the kids who were also native Spanish speaking but bilingual. So I think it's a really interesting question. How do you ignite and foment social language, because it's not to be taken for granted just because we happen to teach in two languages. So that's a cool question, and look forward to the rest of the presentation.
I have to say, as a very beginning intermediate Spanish speaker, I love to read and write it so much more than speak because I have all the time to think about all the grammar I know, to deconstruct when I am reading, and to think about it when I am writing. So yeah, I'm not a good speaker of Spanish. Slowly, not louder, just slowly. I need processing time. Yeah. All right. So but probably most important is afterwards, if you want to find me, my professional email is mossgrove@wisc.edu because it's the University of Wisconsin. So that's me. So I wanted to start with sharing a resource because this is bilingual educators. This is hot off the presses. And when I say that, I mean literally hot off the presses. It was released week and a half ago. I mean, like hot off the presses from Wida is Marco Ale. And so the Wida Espanol project part of Wida has created Wida Spanish Language Arts Framework. And there are 2 documents. So there's one that is standards, design, and enhancement, and one that is more focused on teaching and learning. And the website I have up here for you. It is written in Spanish, and there are summaries at the end of sections in English. So that was done very intentional with the idea that it is meant for teachers who teach Spanish. I often find it very confusing that you'll hear of bilingual programs where the English side is taught by monolingual English speakers or darn near close to monolingual English speakers, but then whatever the second language is taught by fluently bilingual teachers who speak English as well as they speak the other language. And I think, how does that work? So it's very intentional that it's written in Spanish, and it can be found on the Wida website under Teach, and then it's Marco Ale. So that is a resource. Some summaries or samples are without cost. There is a cost to purchasing it. They didn't ask me. I'm so sorry. There's my apology. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the assessment that's most thought of when people think about Wida. Sometimes when I do trainings, I'll go places and they're like, oh, we give the Wida test. I'm like, give the Pearson test too. Like it's a specific test, right? So Y-axis, it meets federal policy requirement that English language learners, which is the term used in federal policy, though I heard a little bird say that they're even moving forward with this administration to the shift to calling them multilingual learners. So this is kind of coming out, and I don't have what document it's going to appear in yet, but I was given this update and I thought it's a nice move away from the focus on what they're not yet capable of doing and the focus on what they bring. They're multilingual learners. So the assessment is also used to determine continued eligibility for services. But there's a tension at Wida, right? So we have this assessment that's meant to support students. It's meant to make sure that kids get services they need and the funding that goes along with that. But it also sometimes excludes students from opportunities, right? If they're designated as an English language learner, then maybe this rigorous curriculum or this program is not accessible to them. So that tension is felt at Wida, and I just kind of feel like I should share that. Like we're not unaware. So I wanted to give you a little information about the 2020 edition of the Wida English Language Development Standards Framework that came out last December, where to find it, and what the thoughts are on social and instructional language, which is my focus, right? So this is free. This is how you get it. You go into the Wida website, which is wida.wisc.edu. You go up to Teach. From here, you'll see the 2020 edition. And then on this page toward the bottom, you can click to get a free download. It's big at almost 400 pages. Do not hit print unless you really mean it. You can purchase it, but it's a free PDF. So there you go. So I want to talk a little bit about how this document is organized, and then into some of the things that talk specifically about this type of language. So there's the big ideas, kind of the 4 overarching themes. What is in the framework, some grade level cluster specific materials. So if you've used Wida materials before, the can-do descriptors and the key language uses were separate. Now it's all in one. That's part of why it's so stinking massive. Some additional resources and then appendices. So here are our big ideas. And the one I want to focus on today is the functional approach to language. Like, what do we do with language? What is the purpose? What are the choices we make? Not that all of them aren't important, but that's where we're going to focus today. So it is organized with the idea of the big standard statements. They have not changed any. The next slide, I'll share them with you. Then you have key language uses, which is really that functional moment. So what are students doing with language in their content area classes? And then we break that down further to the idea of what are the language expectations. And I'll give you some specific examples in a moment. And then break that down even a little further, like what kind of language constructions do they need to be able to do to meet those expectations for that use? I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'm going to get through these quickly, and then the rest is a conversation. I'm already halfway done. So we have a new image or graphic for this, and I like it better. The standard one is language for social instructional purposes. And now instead of being the first box, it's the first, and then it slopes under, right? So it supports language for the others. And I want to draw your attention to something else. The abbreviation used to be language of, and now it's language for. And that is very intentional, because language of was often interpreted as, oh, that's the vocabulary. These are the math terms I need to know for this unit. The language for is, how do you discuss this content? How do students co-construct meaning? How do they develop understanding? So it's a little shift, but we hope it's meaningful. So social instructional language we see as the personal, as the foundation to the academic. Like, what is my identity? What is my background? What do I know? What is my lived experience? What do I bring to the learning environment? And that should support learning in all the content areas. It's not like social and instructional language is just for newcomers, or it's just for early learners, you know, our little ones, our pre-K, kindergarten, first, second graders. It's not a precursor, like they don't have to have just enough BICS before we can introduce the CALP. It's the idea that social and instructional language is developed alongside, and certainly some of the most informal happens a little more naturally. But like when you think about putting kids in groups and you want them to talk, well, that's social instructional language, and it still may need sentence frames and visuals and other supports. So this idea of it being an underpinning, not a precursor. I think that's probably my most important point, but I'm going to keep going for a little bit. We think about it as it runs across. Social instructional language develops across all proficiency levels, across all disciplines, across school settings, across topics, tasks, content areas, situations, and isn't just the language of recess or lunch, but it is anytime they're interacting with others. So sitting in a group, working with a science model, trying to figure out. Another kind of organizing feature of the new edition is having a reference code. So this mimics, in a way, content standards. So it's a way to document and provide some kind of focus when lesson planning. We were having an informal conversation about lesson planning before we got started today. So thinking about how does it break down? So this is English Language Development Standard for language arts. It's a grade level cluster of 2, 3. The the clusters of the information in the 2020 edition match the access assessment, except 2.3 is clustered together because it's only paper access that separates them. Florida's paper only state, so it's the only state in the entire 40-member Wida consortium that is only paper. Florida is special. The key language use for this example is narrate. So what are they doing with language? And it's expressive, so producing. And then there are some bullet points of things you might want to focus on during a lesson if this was your objective. So I'm gonna go a little further and say, that's great. Wida has thought about kind of the 4 domains, and they are artificially separated because they have to for federal policy, trying to a way to reimagine them being a little closer together. So listening and reading being interpretive, which includes viewing. So when I look at a graphic organizer, when I look at an image, a picture, a gesture, a facial expression, like all of that is figuring out meaning. And then expressive is the other end, both writing and speaking, but representing, whether I draw a graphic or a picture or gesture or facial expression or, I don't know, interpretive dance, however you express. So our key language uses have adjusted slightly. Narrate, inform, explain, and argue. And these also show up in social and instructional language, right? There are specific examples of each of them across the disciplines, across grade levels. But the idea that I'm going to explain even in my social and instructional. So when I'm sitting with a group of my peers with a model in front, I'm going to explain what I think it's trying to show me, even though that's not just the language for science, that's also social instructional language. So that is my very brief kind of thoughts and introduction. Again, I am Mossgrove at wisc.edu, and I thought from here, I would just turn off my sharing and we would just see each other and open up to a conversation. So I hope that's okay. So I'm all ears. I've silenced a room.
Okay, I can start if you'd like.
I would love that.
Yes, my name is Ivan Cadiz, right? In Spanish it's Cadiz, in English it's Cadiz, Cadiz. I've been called several things. I am a professional learning specialist like you, working with the University of Central Florida with the STEPS program. And so I work with various school districts, okay, and with the dual language kids and the teachers. And one of the things that struck me, and that's why I was intrigued on this topic, is that I realized that when, you know, both languages, when you're in dual language instruction, both languages should be valued equally. And I noticed with the kids, and this was years ago when I was working at the university and I was actually mentoring dual language teachers, because I was one of the first bilingual teachers in Hillsborough County in Tampa years ago, and worked with many states, and dual language is my passion. Well, I noticed that the problem was not really English. The challenge was Spanish. And the more classes I went to and I talked to the kids out of class, you know, when they were in class and they were talking about social studies or math, they were speaking fine in Espanol, right? But then when I would grab them in the hallway and I would ask them questions like, well, tell me, what do you do in your free time? Where are you from? Where are your parents from? All those informal questions, they would like freeze. And I say, wait a minute, what's happening here? And then the more I went into the classrooms, I saw that while they use cooperative learning in the classroom and they use constructivism, they weren't doing enough of the survival Spanish. Okay, they were doing more the formal with their cognates and translanguaging and bridging. Oh yeah, all of that. A lot of vocabulary, but even down to earth expressions, how you would say something in Puerto Rico compared to Cuba when you have so many kids from different countries. So I have been intrigued by that, and I started a program that's called the Bilingual Village. And the Bilingual Village is that community leaders get to go on Zoom with the kids and they interview them. And it has been very interesting to see them, how they have progressed. This is like the second year of it. But there were kids that then, after they interviewed these bilingual leaders, where are you from? What do you do? What do you like about your job? And it was fascinating because some were veterinarians, others were doctors, others were lawyers. But then when they asked them questions, when the leaders asked them questions, they couldn't respond. And I saw that a lot as a former ESOL teacher, that a lot of kids could respond to questions, but making questions in English is harder. And I saw that a lot, even with high school kids. So in elementary, I see the same thing happening. We need to get them out of the classroom too, with activities that lower the anxiety levels so they can communicate socially. They don't do enough. I'm seeing a tendency because of the narrowness of our curriculum. Now you have to cover so much, you have so many minutes, and please, you don't get out of there. And it's sad because they can't get them into art, into doing presentation skits, performances, and so that really concerns me. So what is your thought on all of that?
I actually have two. I don't know if they're the right answers, but here we go. My first thought is having students have shared experiences is an important place to begin a lot of lessons, units, content, so that they're talking about what they're doing together. I think that many teachers feel huge pressure to cover the content. I had a colleague, Dr. Sue Blanchard, I have to give credit where credit's due, who said, teachers are not paid to teach. I thought, well, that's a radical idea. What are they paid to do? She said, well, they're paid to ensure that their students are learning. I thought, I'm going to have to sit on that for a little bit and think about it. But this idea that when we're pressed for time, we stand and we present.
Yes.
I've covered my content. It doesn't mean the kids have learned it. It doesn't mean that they've retained it, processed it, internalized it, found meaning in it. But by golly, I went over it all. So I have now spent their time talking about stuff I already knew. So I have learned nothing because I listened to them. And they may not have learned anything because just because I said it doesn't mean they've listened. So the opportunities to talk support everything else, right? So if they're chatting and some of it's going to be off topic and the answer is, well, that's okay. That's part of how people show up and develop connections and empathy for each other and express their identity. And young people are still developing who they're going to be. So I think it's having shared learning experiences, whether that is an art activity, whether that is a science experiment, whether that is a project, but something that gives them something to talk about. And I know this is another radical idea, but can we all just stop pre-teaching vocabulary with no context?
Right.
Like, I remember memorizing lists of Spanish words. I don't know. I recognize them now. I still don't know what a lot of them mean. Like, the idea of having them engage in something first and then layering on the vocabulary, I think is more helpful. And then that's supporting authentic use of language.
Right.
I don't know if that answered your questions or your thoughts, but maybe
and
someone else wants to add on. Or
that they need more practice also. They just can't expect to introduce the vocabulary, but how do you use it in a real situation? And how take it beyond. And that's what I see sometimes that's missing because of time. Everything now is like time instead of quality. It's quantity. We need to cover so much.
It takes a lot of time to reteach though, if they fail the
Oh, yeah.
test, if they don't get it.
Mhm.
Like you can't move forward in content if they haven't mastered a certain level of it. And that's time consuming too and frustrating for everyone involved. Other people's thoughts, ideas, suggestions, or you can disagree with me. Like I don't have all the answers.
Go ahead. Anybody else who was going to say? Go ahead.
You sure? You sure, Brian? You're
I
good?
see, yeah, you and I see Bianca's unmuted too. So whoever wants to go for it.
Okay.
It's a small
go ahead.
dinner party.
Go ahead.
Hi, guys. I'm Bianca Alonso. I am the lead teacher at Dr. Carlos J. Finlay Elementary School. And we are actually a professional development school with Florida International University. So we're on their campus. Yay. And it's really something, it's a beautiful collaboration that we've had going on for over 20 years now. And so everything that's been said so far is right on point with, what I have observed as an educator for 30 years. I am in charge. I am the ECL, so I'm the ESOL compliance person and the person in charge of all of the Access 2.0 testing. But of course, that we all wear, I know, we all
I'm
wear,
sorry.
that's okay. We all, no, this year was an interesting year with testing, but anyway, so we all wear a lot of hats because I also do 4th grade math and social studies. So, I was, and I'm going to be very frank here, even though we're being recorded, I was really under the hope that that one of the positive aspects of COVID was going to be a possible reframing of the way that we educate our children. Because of the fact that, as you mentioned, that we are so under the gun and we have so much pressure to make sure that content is all covered. And that doesn't allow for a lot of the rich conversation and a lot of what we're talking about, that social language development. So just to give you a very brief example, today I was giving a math lesson and the problem was full of vocabulary that they had no idea what it was all about. Starting with something as simple as a bushel. We don't have apple orchards here. We don't have that kind, they live in pretty much the inner city, right? So they don't see that kind. So I had to stop my lesson because they're reading and they're getting lost just in the words. So the math is not even going to be able to make sense to them because by the time they've read the introduction, they're already like, what? What are they talking about? So they have like no context. Oh, we're in an apple orchard and there's 42 trees and each of those trees gives a bushel full of 43 apples, et cetera, et cetera. I had to stop, Google, everybody, who knows what a bushel is? Crickets. And I had to make that moment for them. And then they had to, oh, and why don't we have apples? And then we started talking. Ironically, I teach social studies, so I was able to do that. But anyway, just to make a long story short, I mean, I hear everything you're saying. So it's that game, right? It's that balancing act that we're always doing. And good educators know to do it. Good educators know to stop and do what they know is correct. But it's always under that pressure. Yikes. I'm taking a little time away from here and how am I going to get that back later and et cetera, et cetera. So these are all real problems. On top of that, what we have going on. So we have about 200 English, multilingual learners. I like that too. And the spectrum all over the place, and we just had one girl come back from being in Nicaragua for 1.5 years and during COVID. And her learning experience was that the teacher would pass the information on through a text message to the parent and good luck, everybody. And I'll see you next week. And so, and I don't know if that was in the main city or if it was in the country. I'm not sure about the context of that. So, so you're dealing with all of these also different type of experiences that the students have gone through in this past 1.5 years. So, all of those factors, that's why teachers are going crazy because there's real strong, real factors going on. I don't know how else to put it, that we have to take into consideration and juggle every day, and it weighs on us. That's why teachers are so, get so tired and burned out, because a good educator is, thinks about these things at night, on a Thursday night with a group of people from the rest of the country, So yeah, so that's my 2 bits, and just to add something onto the conversation.
Yeah, teaching has always been a hard job, always. 14 years in a classroom. So like, I hope that gives me some experience, but not this past year and a half. Like, I don't know how teachers have survived this past year and a half. It's like extraordinary, right? But I think there's always been interrupted education or less than ideal circumstances, particularly for multilingual learners, but for a lot of marginalized students, right? The access to education, quality education has not always been there. And survival is the most important thing. So sometimes people can be harsh about what kind of family or parental support. I'm like, is that child fed and at school and dressed and loved? Well, parents are doing what they can, and the rest of it, it's our job to educate them. Like, their parents get them to school. Like, that's it. Like, that's the thing, right? I don't think that after last year and a half, the idea is for everybody to make up for lost time. I just think that is more stress on the children. It's what can we do starting from where they're at? They've not necessarily been in the same formal educational settings for the past year and a half, but they've been alive. What have they been doing? Like, what can they bring from their lived experience that can inform what they're doing in class? So I'm from Minnesota. I know what a bushel of apples is, but in Florida, not so much, right? But when I taught in Hillsborough County, my kids knew what a basket of strawberries was. I taught in Plant City, like, they really knew. And so they had that background information. So like, when we gather fruit or produce, we put it in a container. Like, this is a standard container size for apples, in the same way that there's a standard bucket size for blueberries. Like, so that building in, whether it's their own lived experience or their community knowledge, like, this is what their parents do, this is what my uncle does, so I think making those connections so that it's easier to move forward with, well, what do you know? You know something kind of like this, and we can move forward with it. Suzanne, you look like you are waiting. Are you ready?
No. I'm good. I just wanted to add, so going to what Bianca said, I completely empathize where you're coming from. I taught in New York City, so when in the heart of Harlem. So when I told my students, or when whatever program had and talked about like white picket fences and a house with a garage and all that stuff, my kids would look at me like, like I had 5 heads. They're coming from the projects on 125th Street. They're taking the subway. A lot of them don't have cars. The parents don't even have driver's license, things of that sort. So I would have to switch a lot of the things that were embedded into the programs that were purchased or whatever it was that we had. But one of the things that really, going back to what Yvonne was talking about, I am the product of dual language education. I went to a dual language school my entire life, from pre-K to all the way to senior year high school in Puerto Rico. And when I compare the way that dual language program was done there versus the way that I've seen it in many schools in different states here in the US, one thing that really kind of resonates with me, or kind of it's always highlighted, is the fact of the value that the target language or the other language is given, right? And that And what I mean by that is that a lot of times, yes, within the classroom, within the four walls, it's given a lot of value and all that, and the teachers do their utmost to give it all, equal equal value as to English, right? But but the big but is that once you step out of out of those four walls, it's a whole different ball game, right? And so when I compare it to my experiences growing up, English and Spanish were both given the same value, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, throughout everything that we did. I remember I was part of Oratoria en Español, La Liga de Oratoria en Español, right? As well as we had Forensics League. So those were two leagues that were there, both in English and in Spanish, and we competed with other schools around the island. And so, there was math tournaments in both English and in Spanish, and all these things. And so it wasn't just inside the four walls, it was outside of the four walls. And I think that carries a lot of weight because we had no choice. We had to practice our BICS and our CALP in both English and Spanish. It was like whether you were inside the classroom or outside the classroom, you had to do it. I remember even for when I competed in Forensics League in English, I had to practice and work with my accent and make sure, I still remember a teacher, Mrs. Nieves, I still remember her and I still have her on Facebook, believe it or not. She would tell me, the way to say the word ask, and I had to say it correctly and make sure I enunciated and, pronunciation, things of that sort. And so I often think that it comes down to value, the value that we give to both languages in a dual language program and bilingual education. And that not only from the four walls of a classroom, but beyond. And it really, kids know. Kids really know from that. And I think that's where it all stems from. That's in my opinion. But
so what are some of the ways then that you all as educators, or if anybody's doing research that you've seen in research, or if you do professional development that you've suggested or seen or it's been relayed to you, what are some of the ways that dual language programs, bilingual programs are supporting social language in one or both languages?
Like one of the things that I mentioned was, I think that because there's something ingrained even in the kids. I mean, I've spoken to kids in second grade, and they have told me they feel like English is more important. English is more important because we're here in the United States. And it's been interesting when they listen to bilingual leaders, when, they listen to someone who's 22 years old, young, and this person is studying at the university, and they can switch from one language to the other, and they tell them the importance of being bilingual. Kids need to hear this from other people, not just their teachers, not just their parents, but when they hear it from other people, something kind of snaps. And I can tell you stories too. Suzanne, you and I have a very similar background. We should meet sometime and talk about, because I was born and raised in New York and went to Puerto Rico when I was 14 to a bilingual school. But it was because, although I spoke Spanish, I had to be biliterate. And I had to, understand the American culture because there were so many differences, right? So, but then it's true what Suzanne said. I never felt like one language was more important than the other. I was the one who said, I better learn my Spanish well. I have to, my level has to go up higher. And sometimes kids need to even reflect. You talk to kids and you say, well, ¿cómo está tu español comparado con el inglés? And they'll tell you. And so that social part is important. But Terri, I wanted to say something that you said that was very powerful. You mentioned that, teachers are not just paid to teach, but to comprehend. And, to help kids comprehend, but not just comprehend what they're learning, but how to take it to the real world and how to use it. And this is what we're talking about. Social language is so important, right? And how do we do that? And what I am seeing, though, I agree with Alonso's statement. I forgot your first name, Bianca. Bianca, you said that with COVID, you thought that teachers were going to start realizing certain things. And one of the things is, that we talk about the multiple intelligences, but do we use movement in the classroom? Do we use dance? Are we using pantomime? Are we using, anything to help them comprehend in social studies and science? We're not integrating the arts anymore. And we used to, in our time, Suzanne, when we went to bilingual schools, hey, La Nuyorican, because that's what they called me, the Nuyorican, had to get up there and do her little skit in Spanish. Y pronunciar bien el español, it was like, and now we're out of the performances, kids can learn through fun, and they think it's fun. The arts are not fun. It's a foundation to be able to teach science, math, social studies, integrate. And so, this is my cup of tea now with COVID. Let's get the kids moving. Let's get them, because it helps them to comprehend better and to retain information. When they read a script and they have to act it out, they can read it multiple times. They have to practice their pronunciation. So, I know we go in education, those of us who've been for a long time, I've been in this for 40 years, and we go like in circles and circles, right? But I think we need to go back to what used to work and we forgot to do because we're so involved in covering all the standards. How many minutes a day? Oh, we went 2 more minutes on this. And we have some schools and some administrators that are in, I think that's where we have to hit, is our leadership, get them involved, because if our principals have an understanding of language acquisition, they're going to be instructional leaders. So it's everyone in the school has to buy into dual language. The more people we train, the better it is. So that's my cup of tea. I know I can get really into it.
The culture of a school is set by the administration, right?
Right.
And if they don't have buy-in into philosophy, a program, or if they do, that changes how that policy is implemented in that space, right? So it has a lot to do with who the administrators are and how they kind of conceive of that learning space. I was reading, Ryan was writing a lot. So he's just typing along.
Yes, I see.
So several notes, like the idea on bilingual is drawing on both simultaneously. Like, I think there is this idea sometimes by monolingual speakers, and I truly would not describe myself as bilingual. I would say that I'm struggling to speak some of another language. I hope I speak English well and still working on it. But I think there's sometimes this thought by monolinguals that they are 2 separate entities in the brain, like, here's my Spanish thoughts, here are my English thoughts, or whatever the 2 languages are, and never the 2 cross. And that's not really how thinking occurs. And so that idea of building an awareness, even in those who don't speak more than 1 language, that's not really how it works, that students need to be able to not only draw on both languages, but then sometimes part of their linguistic repertoire is being able to produce in one or the other. Like, that's part of it too. And Daniel, we have not heard from you yet. I don't know if you wanted to speak or if you're like, yeah, don't call on me, I'm just here to listen. Like, did you mispronounce my name? And no. I didn't know if you wanted to share because I hadn't heard from you yet.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here and see and meet new folks as well. I was just wanted to agree with what Ryan said in the chat about the notion of there is not really such a thing as balanced bilingual, but we can emphasize the strengths and needs of students. I think that depending on the context, I think it's just so context dependent. For social interaction, I'm left wondering about the school's position in a community and the links to community, because for some schools, I know that the students that live in the community of the school, it's there's so much in the partner language that happens at home and that happens in the store, in the supermarket, and in every aspect of their lives, like where we are in the FIU area, it's so Spanish heavy. So there is already a lot of that happening, I would imagine, with the families and how the school is related to the community. So I wonder if the link from the school and the community outreach or family engagement, I wonder if that is a factor in the development of social language for students. That's just one thought that I had. So thank you.
Yeah, I was also curious about Yvonne and your experience, or anybody else's, if you all feel like the social Spanish or the Spanish social language could use some practice, like who the students are that could use that practice. Like, was it kind of across the board? Was it the students who used Spanish at home? Was it the students who didn't use Spanish at home? I'm just curious.
Well, in my experience, and I'm talking about Florida because I did work states like Texas and worked Miami, which is a whole different ball game in Miami, right? But talking about Florida, and specifically, I'm working in Hillsborough County, Pinellas, Manatee, Sarasota. I see a big difference, for example, Sarasota and Manatee, because there are a lot of migrant families there. So Spanish seems to be the language that they speak at home, all right? And not all of them though, because there are many of the new generation that are coming and they really don't even speak. They understand it, but they don't speak it. But talking about, for example, in Tampa, I am very concerned, and I've been here for many years, because we're having a lot of kids who are becoming subtractive bilinguals. They come from Puerto Rico, Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, and speaking Spanish fluently. And they come to school, and then now all of a sudden they understand Spanish, but they don't speak it. Now, the thing is, there needs to be more, for me, what I'm seeing, and that's why I've branched out now into outreach and getting the parents to be more involved. And I speak to the parents and I tell them, you know what? My father, when I came home from school, living in Puerto Rico and living in New York, when I came through that door, my father would say, aquí se habla en español. And they would look at me and I say, oh yeah. And in my times, my father would take off his belt, and not that he would hit me, but it was like this thing, right? I mean, it's cultural. And I know that I see Suzanne that she's laughing, but she would say, un correazo, aquí se tiene que hablar en español, because you're going to learn English in school. And so that was the old generation, right? I'm a baby boomer. So very different. Now the parents are letting them. And I have two granddaughters that I'm always fighting with my daughter and my son-in-law, because they have a tendency of constantly speaking English at home and they don't vary the language, whereas my daughters are all bilingual because I told them the same thing. En casas, vamos a hablar en español. You know, so that way you're bilingual, and they're so happy that they're bilingual now. So there's this tendency we need to, the parents are feeling, they don't feel comfortable coming to school. They don't feel they could be themselves, all right? And I think it has a lot to do with the planning of it all. You know, you just can't invite parents to come to school, the same thing that they do with everybody else, you know, no, have some music, call them, tell them to come and share some of their food, right? So they feel comfortable. And I've been doing that with some schools, and now they're coming to all of the meetings and they're getting on virtually. But I say, start on virtually, con una musiquita, put a little music on. It lowers their anxiety level, right? So I think there's still a lot of collaboration that we could still be doing with the parents. And I think we need to kind of just help them learn what are some of the strategies that they can use and what organizations are available. Like, for instance, you know, I've worked in Tampa with 18 organizations. Voz y Acción de Puerto Rico, Hispanic Professional Women's Association, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And I have my buddies, and all I do is call them and I say, can you please send me some gift certificates? We're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month at Garrison Jones, and they have a dual language program. Oh yes, Yvonne, because this is my message to them. We need to give back to our community. We're Hispanic, we've been successful, let's give back, right? So that's being very successful for me. So if we could mentor schools to doing the same, they don't have to start with 18 organizations, but you know, every district has a Cuban organization, Dominican, and they want to collaborate, they want to help, and they just don't know how, right? And so that's my suggestion.
I think you bring up two huge points. One is often schools have a very transactional relationship with parents.
Yes.
Come in, help with our book fair,
Mhm.
field trips,
Mhm.
cafeteria. But like, we want you to come in and work, and then we're going to tell you how to teach your kids. Not the best relationship building there, right? So that realizing that parents have goals for their students and the knowledge and something to offer, but that kind of transactional thing is not the way we get parents involved. The other thing you said, I think Ryan mentioned it earlier, the idea that education flows back and forth. I'm not sure it's a circle. I think maybe it's a pendulum that it swings. Like, I'm not quite 40. I'm years in. I'm closer to 30 some, but like, I can see where it went this way, and then it's, we're going to do whole language. We're going to do phonics. We're going to do whole language. Like, the pendulum swings. I think teaching home language also swings. So I am second generation here. So my grandparents, we're in America, we speak English. Like, and then the next generation was, which is more ours, Yvonne and I, not all of us. I'm talking about you, Ryan. The next generation was, if there was another language at home, you shared it. And then I think it swung back again to, oh, wait, no, we don't. So I think even that is a pendulum swing. And I think it happens in a bigger social context. So there are a lot of communities in this country right now that it might not be the best, safest choice in public spaces to show off your linguistic repertoire by speaking something other than English for safety. And like, this is a horrible thing to say, and I realize I'm very privileged that I can draw attention to it because it is not something that impacts me directly. But I think we're in a social context right now that there's also, you know, I want my kids to speak English really well because then they can get good jobs and be okay in the society that has a lot of pushback against many groups who speak another language, depending on what that language is and what dialect it is. And like, I'm not sure this is the best way to end our conversation on such a heavy note, but I think it is a huge part of why perhaps parents are thinking about those decisions.
Can I just interject here a second before we leave? I know we're getting to that point. So yes, I want to say that I want to give you a little bit of background about myself as well, because I come from a multilingual household as well. My mom is Filipino, product of a German father and a Filipino mother. So when she met my father, who was from the Basque country in Spain, having his own indigenous language and then Spanish as a secondary language, they didn't know each other's language. So it was purely a chemical reaction when they met, right? And so I'm very blessed in that I did learn both languages simultaneously. I was educated here in the United States. So I really think primarily in English. So like I tell the kids, oh, today Mrs. Alonso woke up with her English brain on or her Spanish brain on, because the words won't come. And I won't be able to say, an articulate word in Spanish. It won't happen. And then there are days that I'm like a poet in Spanish, and it happens. But what I was going to say was that I think that we have to continue, and to leave on a positive note is, to continue raising awareness. And yes, that's a real worry that we have, right? I mean, for the first time last year during social studies, I was afraid to talk. I was afraid that that my words would be misconstrued one way or the other. And I would have to be constantly saying, like, if you like Biden, that's fine. And if you like Donald Trump, that's fine. But it's all in this context that all of a sudden everything was very gray for the first time ever in 30 years for me, that I was like, oh, things are not just this way or that way. But going back to what you were saying, I think we have to just continue to promote it. We do it. I just want to do a plug for my school. I believe so much in my school. We do so much to build community. We have employees in our school that are from the community. So our parents feel welcome, and there is a sense of family in our school. So I'm very grateful for that, as well. And so I just wanted to say there are a lot of good schools doing a lot of good things, and to end on a positive note. And we have to keep fighting the good fight, and it's all good. And we have to think on a world level, because that's what we're really moving towards, I would hope, is a more global level of how, the internet's got us there. Now we have to do it, like you said, in our social language. We have to continue to promote understanding each other in all kinds of languages, so that's
I just wanted to end too. I agree with you. I just think that we need to be more advocates and give people ideas. Like when we were talking about the parents, I just spoke in one school and said, look, there is one parent who could be the leader of this group. Let them come up with the ideas. Let them tell you what they want to do. And you know what they did? And it was a successful activity. So now the principal of that school says, you know what? I'm going to let Mrs. Martinez run the dual language parents. And I said, yes. So, it's just a part of, like you mentioned, knowledge, awareness, collaboration, advocacy. And we just need to be more out there and educate people and get people together. So I want to thank you, Terri. This was very, very good, very informative. And just getting everyone together is fabulous.
I always feel like the best conversation is not necessarily what the presenter presents, but the conversation that happens after.
Yes.
And what bubbles up from there. So thank you all for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes,
And,
thank you all for-
Thank you so much.
I like to call this Friday Eve. So have a lovely evening.
Oh,
Tomorrow
thank
is
you
Friday.
very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for spending your Friday Eve with us. Thank you, Terri, particularly for your presentation, for your comfortable interaction style, for everybody else feeling comfortable enough to share, to ask, to engage in various ways. This is something that we do semi-regularly with FABE, so I hope that you will tune in. We are on social media. We are now on Instagram. You can search for us. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. I think the only one we might not be in right now is LinkedIn.
Are you dancing on TikTok, Ryan?
That's it.
Not yet.
Lo vamos a poner a bailar ya mismo.
Bueno, está bien. Es que antes pusimos Savage Inequality se llama? Savage what? The one that like blew up on TikTok, the song.
Oh.
Savage something. Savage Love. Sorry, Savage Inequalities is Jonathan Kosel's book. Savage Love. And so we were listening to it and dancing to it, but it was not placed on TikTok. It's not quite my thing yet. Anyhow, thank you very much. Please stay tuned. And I hope to see everybody soon. Actually, I'll see you tomorrow.
Right, I'll see you tomorrow, right, Ryan? We have a meeting tomorrow.
Yes, ma'am.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terri.
You're welcome. And I will, for whatever it's worth, send you a copy of the PowerPoint and that resource on translanguaging.
Awesome.
By the way, Terri, while you were, I already